The studio lights burned hot, cameras already rolling when it happened. Kaitlan Collins, her voice sharp and cutting, suddenly broke through the chatter with a yell that sliced the air like a blade. "Get out." The words echoed. For a split second, it was as if the walls themselves absorbed the insult, holding it there in heavy silence. Staffers froze, the panel stiffened, and every eye locked on Jasmine Crockett. America had seen Collins ask hard questions before, but this wasn't journalism, it was a command, dripping with disdain. Freeze frame. Time slowed. A voice, almost cinematic, carried the moment into history, one shout. One reply. And America held its breath. Because in that instant, the entire nation could feel the stakes. This wasn't just about a studio squabble or a clash of personalities. No, this was about power, identity, and who gets to stand in the room when the conversation turns uncomfortable. Collins thought she had the upper hand. A raised voice, a forceful gesture, classic tactics meant to dominate the stage. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't cower, didn't scramble for composure. Instead, she leaned into the silence, her expression calm, her body language firm. That stillness was louder than Collins's outburst. It was the kind of poise that signals, "You just made a mistake." And here's where history bends. Because Jasmine Crockett's reply, just a few sharp words, would become the most replayed political moment of the year. A reply that didn't just silence Kaitlan Collins, but sent shockwaves through living rooms, newsrooms, and social media feeds across America. The audience in the studio didn't know it yet. The viewers at home couldn't have guessed. But in the next heartbeat, something unforgettable was about to happen. Imagine the hush right after a lightning strike, when the world feels suspended between thunder and silence. That was the air in the studio. Millions of future replays, millions of future tweets, all compressed into that one breath before Crockett spoke. And when she did, the balance of power flipped. But here's the twist, her reply, as powerful as it was, wasn't the whole story. Because what led to this explosive clash, the build-up that brought two women to the boiling point of confrontation, was even more shocking than the moment itself. The CNN debate was supposed to be another night of sharp questions, rehearsed talking points, and clipped exchanges. But this one carried a different weight. The studio was packed tighter than ever, journalists, party operatives, campaign staffers, and a restless audience, all aware that what happened on this stage wouldn't stay here. It would ripple through headlines, shape narratives, and fuel 100 viral clips before sunrise. Kaitlan Collins walked into that atmosphere with her reputation already carved in stone. She was known for pressing hard, for cutting off answers mid-sentence, for driving her questions like spears. Some called it fearless journalism, others whispered it was theater disguised as toughness. Tonight, she was sharper than usual, her tone clipped, her body language daring. Every word she threw carried an edge, as though she wasn't just moderating but prosecuting. And across from her sat Jasmine Crockett. A congresswoman, yes. A fighter, absolutely. But in the eyes of many, still the underdog. She wasn't the household name Collins was, nor the polished media darling that other guests often appeared to be. Some dismissed her as a loud newcomer, others as a voice destined to get lost in the storm. And yet, there she was, calm, unshaken, the fire in her eyes signaling that she wasn't there to play the part people had scripted for her. This wasn't just two women sparring. No, the stakes towered higher. In Collins's commanding tone, many viewers heard the echo of power trying to silence. In Crockett's stillness, they saw something else, something rare in politics today, dignity under fire. The clash was no longer personal. It had become symbolic, embodying the question that has haunted American politics for decades: who gets to speak, and who gets told to sit down? The tension grew thicker with each exchange. Collins pressed, pushing limits the way she always did, her voice swelling as though sheer volume might bend the narrative in her favor. Crockett, however, didn't meet fire with fire. She let the words hang, let the hostility echo, and responded with measured calm that made Collins's aggression look almost desperate. That contrast, sharp aggression versus steady dignity, was the fuel that turned this moment from a heated debate into something unforgettable. The audience in the room could feel it, even if they didn't yet understand the weight of what was coming. You could sense the whispers of disbelief, the shifting in seats, the subtle intake of breath, as if everyone knew they were on the edge of something historic. Because this wasn't just about a debate. It wasn't about a network moderator or a congresswoman fighting for her moment. It was about the broader battle that millions of Americans watched unfold every day in their own lives, the battle between being silenced and standing tall. Collins's outburst, "Get out," was more than a command to one person. It was a mirror reflecting every time someone had been dismissed, every time dignity had been shoved aside by arrogance. And Crockett's response, the reply that was seconds away, would become bigger than herself. It would become a rallying cry, a reminder that calm strength can shatter arrogance more effectively than the loudest insult. The cameras were already zoomed in, the audience already leaning forward, the tweets already being drafted in living rooms across the country. They didn't know it yet, but what was about to happen would rewrite debate history. Kaitlan Collins didn't stumble into the spotlight, she charged into it. From the moment she first sat in front of a camera, her style was clear, sharp, unflinching, confrontational. To some, she was the journalist America needed, tough, relentless, unafraid to cut through the noise. To others, she was a hammer searching for nails, striking harder than necessary, mistaking interruptions for insight and volume for victory. Either way, she became known, and in the world of television news, notoriety is a kind of currency. Her rise was built on clashes. Night after night, Collins made her name by going head-to-head with powerful figures. Presidents, senators, CEOs, she confronted them all with the same energy, aggressive, impatient, almost daring them to push back. The spectacle made for good television, and in an industry that thrives on drama, Collins became a star. But along the way, controversy followed. Critics accused her of crossing lines, of turning interviews into interrogation chambers. She cut off guests mid-thought, demanded answers before questions were even complete, and wielded the moderator's microphone like a weapon. Some praised it as bravery, others saw it as arrogance dressed in professionalism. And while the public was divided, the network saw the numbers climb. Viewers tuned in not just for information, but for the fireworks. Collins delivered those fireworks with precision. Yet beneath the acclaim, something else was brewing. For every headline celebrating her takedowns, there were murmurs about her methods. Was she too aggressive? Too dismissive? Too willing to bulldoze others in order to dominate the frame? Time and again, Collins doubled down. Her belief was simple: in debates, as in journalism, the loudest voice won. To her, silence was weakness. Stillness was surrender. She believed volume was victory. That night, she was wrong. The Kaitlan Collins that walked into the CNN debate wasn't just a moderator. She was an archetype, the enforcer of authority, the figure who believed her presence alone could bend the moment to her will. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had silenced countless others before and expected tonight would be no different. Her tone was already set before the cameras rolled, sharp, clipped, edged with impatience. For Collins, this wasn't just another debate. It was her stage, her arena, and she intended to own it. Every gesture, every glare, every carefully timed interruption was meant to signal control. She wasn't there to guide the conversation, she was there to dominate it. And in that domination lay the arrogance that defined her style. She had faced pushback before, angry guests, critics, even fellow journalists, but she had always emerged with her reputation intact, if not stronger. The controversy only amplified her brand. Why should this night be any different? In her mind, it wasn't. Crockett was simply another voice to cut off, another moment to command, another clip to circulate where she stood tall while someone else faltered. But Collins underestimated the moment. She mistook Crockett for a predictable opponent, someone who would react with the same frustration she had provoked in so many others. She expected eye rolls, raised voices, maybe even a walk-off, all things that would reinforce Collins's image as the immovable force. Instead, what she got was something she hadn't prepared for: calm defiance. Because Crockett wasn't just another guest. She wasn't there to play by the old script. She wasn't intimidated by Collins's raised voice or sharp tone. And that shift, so subtle at first, was what made the entire confrontation so unforgettable. The irony was clear: Collins's rise had been built on commanding the room, on bending conversations to her will. But this time, her usual tactics wouldn't hold. The very style that made her famous would betray her, exposing not her power but her weakness. In trying to silence, she would be the one drowned out. In trying to dominate, she would be undone. Collins had faced senators and presidents, but her toughest opponent wasn't someone she expected. Jasmine Crockett's story begins far from the polished lights of a CNN studio. It begins in Texas, in neighborhoods where working-class grit wasn't an abstract concept but a daily reality. Raised with the understanding that opportunity wasn't handed out freely, she learned early that dignity wasn't a given, you fought for it. That lesson shaped her, and long before she ever stepped into politics, she had already begun the work of defending those who were denied dignity. Her path took her into law, not as a career of prestige but as a calling of protection. In cramped courtrooms and tense hearings, she stood as the advocate for those who had no one else to stand for them. Civil rights cases, discrimination claims, people who were dismissed because they lacked power, Crockett took them all. Every case wasn't just a client, it was a fight for fairness in a system tilted against the underdog. She became known not just as a lawyer, but as a defender. A woman who turned personal conviction into professional mission. But the courtroom was only the beginning. That same energy carried her into the heart of politics. Elected to Congress, Crockett didn't arrive with the pedigree of the elite or the backing of dynasties. She wasn't the product of generational influence, she was the product of relentless drive. Her presence in Congress was itself a statement: a black woman from Texas, determined to bring the fight for justice into the halls of power. Inside those halls, she was often underestimated. Her opponents dismissed her as fiery but inexperienced, passionate but unpolished. They believed her voice could be sidelined, drowned out by the machinery of politics. But again and again, Crockett proved them wrong. She spoke out when silence would have been easier. She held her ground when others expected her to fold. Every clash only sharpened her resolve, and every attempt to minimize her only made her stand taller. Her congressional battles mirrored her courtroom days: tough, unflinching, personal. Whether it was defending voting rights, calling out hypocrisy, or challenging narratives meant to suppress, Crockett refused to play the role others wrote for her. She made her own script, one rooted in resilience. She wasn't in politics to perform, she was there to protect the people who had been ignored for far too long. But beyond the speeches and the fiery exchanges on the record, there was the human side that explained why she fought so hard. For Crockett, every debate, every moment of pushback, wasn't about ego, it was about the communities she carried with her. She represented women who had been told to stay quiet, minorities who had been told to wait their turn, immigrants who had been told they didn't belong. Every time she raised her voice, it was their voices rising through her. Every time she stood her ground, it was their strength on display. And yet, what made her remarkable wasn't just her strength in the spotlight. It was the quiet conviction behind it. She wasn't driven by the desire to humiliate or to dominate. She was driven by the belief that dignity, her own and that of those she represented, was worth defending. That conviction gave her power in moments when others might have faltered. For her supporters, Crockett became more than a politician. She became a symbol of resilience, of representation, of the refusal to bow to arrogance. She embodied the fight of every underdog who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. She was proof that scars could become armor, that battles endured could become strength carried forward. And those scars mattered. Because politics, like life, leaves marks. The struggles Crockett faced weren't erased when she entered Congress, they traveled with her. The dismissals, the underestimations, the obstacles, each one left its mark, but instead of weakening her, they steeled her. They turned her into someone who could not only endure insult but transform it into strength. So when she walked into that CNN studio, she wasn't just another guest. She was the culmination of years of struggle, years of battles fought and won, years of refusing to be silenced. And while Collins prepared to dominate the night with sharp interruptions and booming volume, Crockett carried something Collins couldn't touch, the unshakable confidence of someone who had already been tested in the harshest of arenas. The audience didn't know it yet, but everything about Crockett's journey had led to this moment. The Texas roots, the courtroom fights, the congressional clashes, the scars she wore with pride, all of it formed the steel behind her calm. And it was these very scars of struggle that armed her for the moment Kaitlan Collins screamed those two words. The studio lights burned hot, and the tension inside the CNN debate was already thick enough to feel. From the opening exchanges, it was clear Kaitlan Collins had a plan: dominate early, dominate often, and never give her opponent room to breathe. She interrupted with the practiced sharpness of a seasoned anchor who believed she could control not just the conversation, but the very air in the room. Every time Crockett began to lay out a point, Kaitlan's voice cut in like a blade, slicing the words in half before they could land. At first, Crockett responded with restraint. Her composure was deliberate, the measured calm of someone who had spent years in hostile courtrooms and contentious congressional hearings. She didn't raise her voice to match Kaitlan's volume. She didn't fire back with insults or anger. Instead, she let silence do part of the work, pausing, steadying her tone, and speaking directly to the audience as if Collins' interruptions were nothing more than background noise. That calmness wasn't weakness, it was strategy. It was dignity refusing to bend. The interruptions kept coming. Collins pressed harder, leaning on her reputation for being confrontational. She tossed questions like darts, never letting Crockett finish an answer. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the imbalance, feeling the clash building with each exchange. On television screens across the country, the camera operators recognized the drama and began zooming in, tight shots of Crockett's steady gaze, wider frames of Kaitlan's animated interruptions, the visual telling the story of a duel that was becoming personal. Crockett began to slip in subtle jabs, not with volume, but with precision. A raised eyebrow when Collins overreached. A pointed line that landed before Kaitlan could bulldoze her way back in. A steady cadence that contrasted perfectly with Kaitlan's increasingly sharp tone. Each moment built on the last, and the tension spread through the room like static electricity. Everyone could sense that something had to give. Collins' voice grew sharper, more insistent. She wasn't just debating now, she was trying to overwhelm, to assert dominance through sheer force of sound. Her tone carried an edge of frustration, as though Crockett's refusal to be rattled was itself an act of defiance. Each time she leaned forward, cutting Crockett off, the clash became less about policy and more about power. Then came the snap. Kaitlan's patience broke. Her voice, already sharp, cut through the studio like a whip. Two words, barked across the stage, loaded with entitlement and arrogance: "Get out." The studio froze. The audience inhaled, the silence sudden and heavy. Cameras locked in, capturing the shock on faces, the electricity in the air. It wasn't just an outburst, it was an insult hurled in public view, a dismissal that echoed far beyond the walls of that studio. And then, in that heavy silence, all eyes turned to Jasmine Crockett. Her composure didn't break. Her silence stretched for a beat too long, long enough for the weight of Kaitlan's outburst to sink in. The stillness itself became suspense. Everyone in that room, from the audience in their seats to the millions watching at home, leaned forward, waiting. Because what Crockett said next, no one in that room will ever forget. For a moment, the studio was suspended in silence. Kaitlan's words, sharp, loud, and dripping with dismissal, still hung in the air. "Get out!" The command wasn't just noise, it was meant to humiliate, to erase, to reduce Jasmine Crockett to silence. But the silence that followed didn't belong to Kaitlan. It belonged to Jasmine. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush to fill the void. Instead, Crockett let the stillness breathe, stretching it just long enough for everyone watching, on stage, in the audience, and through millions of television screens, to feel the weight of what had just been said. Her eyes locked on Kaitlan, steady and unyielding. When she finally leaned forward, her voice was not loud, not frantic. It was low, clear, and carried with it the kind of authority that doesn't need to shout. "I was elected to stand here. You can't order me out. You can only be exposed for trying." The words fell like stone into water, each syllable rippling outward, striking harder than any shouted insult ever could. Her calmness was the power. Her refusal to match Kaitlan's volume was the rebellion. Crockett's tone wasn't angry, it was surgical. A controlled incision that revealed the truth beneath the spectacle, that dignity cannot be dismissed, that arrogance collapses under the weight of composure. The audience gasped. It was the kind of collective intake of breath that signals not just surprise, but recognition. Recognition that something bigger than a debate line had just happened. In the first row, a woman's hand flew to her mouth. Across the aisle, a man shook his head slowly, murmuring to the person next to him, as if to confirm he'd really heard what he thought he heard. The sound in the studio shifted from silence to murmurs, a rising tide of disbelief mixed with awe. Cameras caught Kaitlan's face in sharp relief. For the first time that night, her expression faltered. Her eyes blinked faster, her mouth twitched as if caught between firing back and holding her tongue. This wasn't the response she expected. Her tactic, drowning out, overpowering, suddenly looked brittle under the weight of Crockett's reply. Her control was slipping, and everyone could see it. Narration swelled over the scene, not to add, but to underline what was unfolding. This wasn't just a clapback. This was a declaration. A declaration that dignity doesn't need volume. That in politics, as in life, the calmest voice can shake the loudest room. The words replayed in viewers' minds even as the debate carried on. "I was elected to stand here." It wasn't just Crockett defending herself, it was her defending the principle of representation, the right of every underestimated voice to exist in spaces designed to shut them out. It was a moment that transcended the clash on stage, touching something deeper about what it means to be seen, heard, and respected. Some in the audience leaned forward, eyes locked on Crockett like they were witnessing history. Others whispered furiously, phones already in hand, knowing instinctively that what had just happened wasn't going to stay in that room for long. Kaitlan tried to regain footing, clearing her throat, shifting in her seat, preparing another interjection. But the power dynamic had already flipped. It wasn't her debate anymore. The force of her volume had been met, and shattered, by something stronger. Crockett hadn't just answered. She had ended the argument without needing to shout. For the millions watching at home, it played out like a cinematic twist. The antagonist throws her loudest punch, certain of victory, only for the underdog to parry with a single line so clean, so cutting, that the story itself changes. People rewound their TV remotes, pulled up livestream replays, texted friends, "Did you just see that?" Political analysts later would break it down as a masterclass in rhetorical poise, but in the moment, it wasn't analysis that mattered. It was feeling. Viewers felt the balance of the debate shift, felt the air sucked from Kaitlan's authority, felt the electric charge of seeing someone underestimated stand their ground with elegance and fire. Crockett didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She sat back, composed, eyes still locked on her opponent with the kind of look that said, "I don't need to raise my voice. The truth is loud enough." Narration wrapped around the scene, cementing its place. It was the mic drop moment of 2025. A reminder that sometimes history isn't written with fists on podiums or voices raised to shouts, but with one reply, measured, piercing, unforgettable. And yet, what lingered wasn't just the silence of Kaitlan Collins or the gasps of the audience. What lingered was the knowledge that this wasn't over. Because the reply didn't just silence Kaitlan Collins, it lit the internet on fire. The reply hadn't even finished echoing through the CNN studio before the digital wildfire began. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm but devastating words flooded Twitter, now rebranded as X. Hashtag surged to the top of trending, hashtag Crockett wins, hashtag Collins meltdown, and the inevitable hashtag mic drop moment. The replays spread with a velocity only true cultural moments achieve. Journalists clipped the exchange into 15-second loops, TikTok creators layered dramatic music over Crockett's line, and Instagram Reels carried the caption, "The reply heard around America." In one viral TikTok edit, slow-motion zooms captured Crockett leaning forward just before delivering her line, paired with the sound of a cinematic boom effect. Another edit mashed the moment up with sports highlight reels, framing her comeback like a buzzer-beater three-pointer. Memes multiplied. One side-by-side image showed Kaitlan Collins yelling in freeze frame, contrasted with Crockett's poised expression beneath the words, "One spoke loud. One spoke truth." Another meme compared Collins to a malfunctioning microphone while Crockett was captioned as noise-canceling headphones. Humor sharpened into symbolism. This wasn't just banter, it was narrative-making, and Crockett had won control of it. By the next morning, commentators on cable news were dissecting the moment with the zeal of sports analysts reviewing a game-winning shot. On MSNBC, one anchor declared, "It wasn't just a debate. It was a dismantling." Fox News, less willing to crown Crockett, nevertheless ran the clip in a loop with captions like "the shout and the shock." Even CNN, Collins' own home turf, couldn't ignore it. Panelists debated whether she had gone too far, one even sighing, "The optics of yelling 'get out' don't land well in an age of authenticity." Late-night comedians pounced. On The Daily Show, the host mimicked Collins' outburst, then leaned into the camera to whisper Crockett's calm reply, drawing raucous laughter from the audience. Jimmy Fallon staged a parody sketch where Kaitlan's voice was replaced by a foghorn sound, cut short by Crockett's single line. Across platforms, the nation was laughing, but the laughter wasn't evenly distributed. Collins had become the punchline, while Crockett became the punch. Celebrities joined the chorus. Kerry Washington tweeted, "Composure is the ultimate clapback. Bravo, @Jasmine for US." Mark Ruffalo posted the clip with the caption, "That's what courage under fire looks like." Even basketball legend LeBron James couldn't resist, sharing a meme version with a simple crown emoji over Crockett's head. Politicians weighed in too, carefully but clearly. Progressive colleagues praised Crockett as a symbol of grace under attack, while even some moderates admired the composure. A congresswoman from Illinois wrote, "Volume isn't power." Jasmine Crockett proved that last night. Meanwhile, Collins' allies scrambled to defend her, insisting she was passionate and unafraid to challenge. But the public wasn't buying it, mockery outweighed sympathy 10-1. The real test of who had won wasn't in official statements, it was in the numbers. Overnight, Crockett's follower counts skyrocketed across every platform. Her campaign donation page saw a surge. Meanwhile, Collins' clips racked up views, but the tone was different: outrage, ridicule, meme fodder. In the theater of public opinion, the verdict was clear. Narration framed it best: in the aftermath of that night, America didn't just laugh. It watched. It replayed. It chose sides. And for Kaitlan Collins, the fallout was merciless. For Jasmine Crockett, it was vindication. And yet, as much as the hashtags, the memes, and the laughter filled the feeds, something deeper pulsed beneath the spectacle. Viewers sensed that the night wasn't only about one woman shutting down another. It was about dignity in the face of dismissal, about the choice between shouting and standing firm, about how respect is claimed, not granted. The clip may have gone viral for the drama. But beyond the laughter and memes lay a deeper lesson America couldn't ignore. When the roar of hashtags and headlines finally softened, what remained was something quieter, deeper, and far more lasting. Jasmine Crockett had taken an insult, a public dismissal meant to humiliate, and reframed it into living proof of how dignity, calm, and intelligence can dismantle arrogance in its loudest form. In that moment, she showed that debates are not won by decibels but by discipline. She reminded the nation that volume is not victory, that raising your voice does not raise the strength of your argument. Crockett's words didn't need to thunder through the studio. They needed only to land, steady and unshaken, against the storm of Kaitlan Collins' rage. This clash became more than a viral debate clip, it became a parable. Crockett's composure wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. For women in politics, it was a defiant answer to every moment they've been spoken over, dismissed, or told they didn't belong. For minorities, it echoed the resilience of generations who were pushed aside yet refused to stay silent. For anyone who has ever been told to get out, from classrooms, from boardrooms, from public office, Crockett's reply became a rallying cry: stay, stand firm, and let truth speak for itself. The moral clarity of the moment rang beyond partisanship. It was a reminder that the most powerful voices are not always the loudest. The true test of strength isn't how much space you can take up, but how unshaken you remain when someone tries to push you out. Crockett's resolve reflected a larger truth about leadership in a divided era. America doesn't need more shouting matches, it needs the courage to stand in dignity when the world demands a fight. For millions watching, the lesson was personal. Young women saw a blueprint for responding to hostility without sacrificing self-respect. Communities long dismissed saw validation that staying composed is not weakness, it is its own form of power. And ordinary viewers, those who have endured condescension from bosses, neighbors, or strangers, felt a surge of recognition. Crockett didn't just defend herself, she defended them too. The inspirational lift was undeniable. Where Kaitlan Collins' shout had filled the room with chaos, Crockett's reply filled it with clarity. It carried beyond the studio walls, into living rooms, onto phones, into classrooms and offices. It reminded people that strength is not about overpowering but about outlasting, not about shouting but about standing. Narration closed the circle. That night, dignity defeated arrogance. Calm disarmed fury. And truth, quiet, steady, undeniable, proved it doesn't need to shout to be heard. And as the credits of history prepared to roll, the story left one final thought, one final cliffhanger into the lesson that would be remembered long after the memes faded. And it all started with just one shouted insult, and one unforgettable reply. One insult. One reply. And America held its breath. What began as a heated exchange in a studio transformed into something much bigger than a clash of personalities. It became a moment that revealed what real leadership looks like under pressure. Kaitlan Collins raised her voice. Jasmine Crockett raised the standard. And in doing so, she reminded us all that true strength doesn't need to shout, it simply stands unshaken. Her composure wasn't just about winning a debate, it was about redefining what victory means in public life. Crockett showed that leadership is not measured by who interrupts the most, but by who refuses to be broken, who answers hostility with clarity, and who turns an attempt to humiliate into proof of resilience. This story wasn't just Crockett's, it was ours. For every viewer who's been told to leave, dismissed, or shouted down, her reply carried a message: you belong, your voice matters, and dignity will always outlast arrogance. Now it's your turn. If you believe dignity beats arrogance, share this story. Let it remind others that strength isn't found in the loudest voice, but in the calmest truth. And if you want more true moments where courage silences the noise, subscribe now. Because this is only the beginning. America held its breath that night, but the lesson it left behind still echoes. One insult. One reply. And a reminder that when dignity stands tall, it never stands alone.